This is a reading from the Gospel of John, from chapter 11. It's about the death of Lazarus. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany. This was the village where Mary and her sister Martha lived. Mary was the one who had anointed the Lord with perfume and had wiped his feet with her hair, and her brother Lazarus was sick. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, the one you love is sick." When Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it's for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." And accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and loved Lazarus, after hearing that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. After this, he said to the disciples, "We are going to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the people were just now trying to stone you to death, and you're going to go back there again?" And Jesus answered, "Aren't there 12 hours of light in the day? Those who walk in the day don't stumble, because they can see the light of this world. But those who walk at night stumble because the light's not in them." After saying this, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep. I'm going to go there and awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he's going to be all right." Jesus, though, had been speaking about his death, but they thought he was just talking about sleep. Jesus said to them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. Let us go to him." Thomas, who was called the twin, said to the other disciples, "Let us also go with him, so that we may all die together." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in his tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was close to Jerusalem. It was only about 2 miles away. And many of the people had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, but Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, I know that he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day." But Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, they will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord. Yes, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world." When she'd said this, she went back to her home, and she called to her sister Mary, and she told her privately, "Teacher is here, and he's calling for you." When she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village. He was still at the place where Martha had met him. The people who were with her in the house, consoling her, they saw Mary get up quickly and go out, and they followed her because they thought that she was going to her brother's tomb to weep. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the people who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in his spirit, and he was moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said to him, "Lord, come and see." And Jesus began to weep. The people there said, "See how much he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of a blind man have kept Lazarus from dying?" Then Jesus, still greatly disturbed in his heart, came to the tomb. It was a cave, A stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said, "Lord, already there is a smell, Lord, because he's been dead for 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" And so they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and he said, "Abba, I thank you that you've heard me. I know that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." And when he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of grave cloth, and his face wrapped in a shroud. And Jesus said to him, and all of those, "Unbind him and let him go." Hear what the Spirit of God is saying to the church. Let's talk about this together. Well, brothers and sisters, happy Sunday. Friends, let us pray. God of weeping and God of joy, lead us out from our despair into laughter and fellowship again, Lord, and send us a word. You are Lord of Lords. Amen. This week I said goodbye to a mentor and a friend. Ted Jennings Jr. completely changed my relationship with the Bible, with theology, and with how I could be a Christian in the world. And today's reading from John's Gospel has so much of Ted's spirit and energy in it that it is providence to see it in the lectionary today. Ted may have died in a hospital in Mexico City this week, but he is very much a perpetual light in my life. And if I had hours, I couldn't tell you enough about him. So suffice to say that this sermon is dedicated to his life and his work. So in John's Gospel, there is this mysterious and compelling figure who is very central to the story, and the person is never given a formal name in a lot of different places. They're referred to as the disciple whom Jesus loved, or the beloved disciple. They're mentioned 6 times this way, specifically in the Gospel. At the Last Supper, we see the beloved disciple reclining in Jesus' arms. When Jesus says that he's going to be betrayed, it's this disciple who kind of violently demands to know who's going to do this. When Jesus is hanging, dying upon a Roman cross, and he's been abandoned by all of his followers, there's only a few people that remain there by his side. And they include his mother, Mary, his aunt, his friend Mary Magdalene, and this beloved disciple. And Jesus speaks from the cross and he says to the beloved disciple, "My mother is now your mother." And he says to his mother, "This is now your son." And that's the adoption story from John's Passion. And after the resurrection, when Mary Magdalene discovers the empty tomb, she immediately runs and she tells Peter and the beloved disciple. And the 2 men run to the tomb, and it's the beloved disciple who arrives first. So perhaps overcome with emotion, he doesn't enter the tomb. Peter arrives a little bit later, and then Peter enters the tomb. So the beloved disciple is absolutely central to the Gospel of John. And this figure is so obviously and deeply loved by Jesus. And so figuring out who this disciple actually was is a favorite pastime of Christian scholars and nerds like me for the last couple thousand years. I'm going to tell you who I think this disciple is in just a moment. And while I think it is almost painfully obvious that my answer is definitely right and all of the other theories are definitely wrong, I'm going to tell you that there are Christian thinkers within a stone's throw of this church right now who think that I'm full of just hooey and that they're the ones with the right answer. And that I'm probably leading you all down a path of darkness and undiluted heresy and all sorts of other terrible stuff. But okay, all that aside, I believe that the beloved disciple is Lazarus. For a couple of reasons. The first reason is because I first encountered this idea with my relationship with Ted Jennings. Ted wrote about this and he researched it in a book called The Man Jesus Loved. And when Ted first explained this to me over beers at Jimmy's, it blew my mind, because the reason that this makes so much sense is because this is exactly what the Bible says. So there's this wonderful family that Jesus lives with. His two sisters and a brother. Their names are Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And in John chapter 11, it literally says, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. And then from today's reading, Mary and Martha, they sent for Jesus, and they say, Lord, the one whom you love is gravely ill. It just makes sense. And then Lazarus is never formally named as a disciple, because he's something different from a disciple. So Jesus lives with them. Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, treat Jesus like a brother in their home. And when Lazarus dies, Jesus weeps at his tomb, and he prays to God to intervene. Now, this is not the only resurrection that Jesus affects in the Bible, but it is the only one where he openly weeps and is clearly overcome by emotion. And then finally, when he's dying, he tells his mother, you are to live with this person now, with Lazarus now. And with Lazarus, who I lived with, he is now your son. So in other words, I'm dying. I have covenanted into this family, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, and I've lived with them, and now he is your son. In other words, that's exactly what any normal person would expect from the family that they had married into. And so maybe now you see a little bit why people have kind of a difficult time with this idea, because it implies an understanding of the Gospel of John where the relationship of Jesus and Lazarus is not that of a teacher and a student, but is quite clearly a very profound relationship, and it is one that can probably only be described in our context as a marriage. Now, as I said, Ted Jennings Jr. wrote a book about this, and he gave it as plain a title as he possibly could. He called the book The Man Jesus Loved. And then, right on cue, people started sending Ted death threats. Because narrow-minded people who can only see the world in black and white, they hear these things, and the only thing that registers in their very narrow minds is, that minister just said that Jesus is gay. And these are often the same individuals for whom the word gay does not evoke the idea of a stable, loving, consenting adult relationship where two people create a home together and support one another emotionally and materially and engage in community together and build a life story together, which for all purposes appears to be the case with Mary and Martha and Lazarus and Jesus. This is not what they are thinking when they hear me say the word gay or the word gay marriage or something like that. These are folks for whom the word gay only means the lowest, meanest, ugliest stereotypes and cruel jokes that they've secretly whispered or loudly proclaimed in order to bash people that they don't like. So when they hear a Christian minister unapologetically saying things like Jesus loved Lazarus, was in a covenantal marital relationship with Lazarus, such that Lazarus' sisters were Jesus' sisters, and Jesus' mother becomes Lazarus' mother, and Jesus weeps at Lazarus' tomb, and Jesus so loved Lazarus that he literally used his spiritual gifts to reverse the natural order of the universe, to bring his beloved out from beneath the shadow of death, and that Lazarus reclines on Jesus' breast at the Last Supper, and on and on and on. They cannot see the blindingly obvious fact that Jesus and Lazarus had a human relationship that we today refer to as family. This is the offense that people take. And this is the same offense they take whenever a Christian minister has the temerity to point out the likelihood that Jesus had brown skin, he had curly black hair, that Jesus was a Jew, that Jesus was a poor, homeless person, that he was in any way, shape, or form different from them because they worship a white God and a white Jesus. And because we read the Bible, we know why they do this. It is because they've created God in their own image, and that is the only God that they are comfortable worshiping. But why? Why does it matter if we relate to the Jesus of the Gospel of John as being in a covenant relationship with Lazarus? It matters for the exact same reason that we must know Jesus in all other ways as a human being. He was fully, entirely, and without reservation a human being. And he was completely and thoroughly and fully God. He was fully human and fully divine. God gave us the most precious gift in our Messiah, coming to earth in Jesus Christ. It was a gift of relationship and empathy. Empathy. How can a God have empathy with a mortal? That's a critical question for Christians to ask themselves. How can a God, even the Creator, possibly understand the terror and pain and joy and isolation of mortality? The answer to that question is found lying in a freezing manger in the lowest, filthiest stall in a barn in a backwater province called Bethlehem under the occupation of the Roman army. So it matters that Jesus is an ethnic minority because it means that God is the God of ethnic minorities, and it matters that Jesus describes himself as a mother, because it means that God is the God of mothers. And it matters that Jesus was disabled and in terrible pain when he hung upon the cross, because that means that God is the God of people with disabilities and people who suffer pain. And it matters that Jesus was a religious minority. And all of these marginalized categories of people, and I believe that God gave us the Gospel of John in the Bible, that God gave us the mystery of the love between Jesus and Lazarus, and the adoption of Jesus into Lazarus' family to state plainly that God is the God of gay people, and God is the God of adoption, and that these people cannot ever again be left outside the temple of God's love. I remember one time at seminary there was this heated discussion taking place in a systematic theology seminar, and the classroom bitterly divided itself. I think there was us, Calvinists, and then there was some Lutherans that had shown up, and we were split between the annihilationists and the universalists over the topic of hell and God's justice, and words started to become very pointed and escalated, and finally somebody just beseeched our professor, "Save us from ourselves." And they asked Dr. Laurel Schneider, who is herself this titan of systematic theology, they asked her directly, "What is hell?" And there was this pause. And I remember Dr. Schneider was kind of leaning against this table at the front of the class, and she said, "Hell is a closet." When Jesus arrives at Bethany, he sees his family weeping. He is grieved. His heart is broken. He begins to weep. And there are people that are around him that say, "See how he loved him." And Jesus says, "Where is he? Where have you laid him?" And they say, "Lord, come and see." And then Jesus beheld the tomb, the cave, the closet that holds the man he loves. And there was a great stone lying against it, and Jesus commanded that they take away the stone, and he prays to his Abba, I thank you that you hear me. I know you hear me. I know you always hear me. I thank you for seeing me. He prays and cries with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And the man he loved walked out of that deep darkness, still wrapped in the clothes of the dead. And Jesus spoke again and said, unbind him. Unbind him and let him go. So then perhaps the shadow of death is around us, and each of us has known the inside of a closet. I don't know, the still darkness of a cave. We feel the aroma of death surrounding us. It is a dark that lives in the deep earth. Who put us there? Who laid us in the tomb? Was it this current disease, this pandemic, this plague? Or at another time, was it our own family who said we were dead to them? Was it our supposed friends abandoning us? Was it some mortal power like the state imprisoning us? Perhaps some of us walked into that closet entirely on our own accord. Perhaps it was some sickness. I don't know. I don't know what kind of closet they put you in. But I do know that there is somebody waiting, weeping, praying for you. There is somebody talking to God on your behalf. There is somebody standing just there outside, saying to you, calling to you, speaking your name, ready to unbind you. If you are in that place of despair, receive this word of hope. There is no power on this planet that is greater than Jesus Christ. And there is a voice calling to you. A voice that loves you more than you can possibly understand. And when you are ready, he's there, waiting for you. And all God's children said, Amen.